Hi, I'm Beth, creator of dryitcanit.com. I like to share tips and tricks as well as recipes that I create for dehydrating food and canning food, and now freeze-dried food as well. I recently took the plunge and bought myself a freeze dryer. I had thought about this for a year, and really as I was putting recipes together, I found out that there's more flexibility and I can do more if I actually have some freeze-dried food. Now, freeze-dried food is expensive when you buy it. But I gotta tell you, a freeze dryer is not cheap. They're expensive also. But as my husband and I were talking about it, we are not preppers by any sense of the word, but we have decided that we want to store a little bit more food than we have been. And I like the idea of meals, and I like the idea of meals where I can mostly just add water. So I've been playing with my freeze dryer a little bit and thought I'm going to start sharing some of the things with you. I bought a Stay Fresh freeze dryer. After doing a lot of research, I think it's the best. There's a Harvest right out there, which a lot of people are really happy with, but there are also a lot of complaints and problems with it, and most recently people are starting to get their pans warped. There's also another product out there called Blue Alpine, which I think people are genuinely kind of happy with, but they're really, really new and don't have a good track record yet. They don't have a bad track record either. But the Stay Fresh has really good customer support. I've called them for a couple of things. The unit is really good, and that's why I chose that particular unit. So what I get with that, I bought the 4-shelf one, which is the smaller of the unit, and it comes with 4 trays. Now these trays are 8 inches by 20 inches, and they're plenty big for what I need because at this point in time, it's just my husband and I. But one of the first things I did, besides wash everything off, is I numbered my trays. I don't know if you can see that number or not, but over in the corner here, you'll see a number 3. Part of the reason I did that is because when you're freeze drying, you really want to keep a log of what you're doing. You know, what did you put in? How long did it take? And then you'll start getting a track record for how things will work, because it's very different than dehydrating. The way freeze drying works is you either put your food in frozen or you let it freeze in the freeze dryer. Now, generally, I think putting it in the freezer makes sense because you're using less power with your freeze dryer to freeze the food, and the food does have to be frozen. My freeze dryer will get down to minus 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Your freezers, your chest freezers are generally 0 degrees. I have food pre-frozen oftentimes in the freezer. Today, I just don't have room in the freezer, quite frankly, and I want to see how long it's going to take to do some things without pre-freezing it. So, locally at the store, they had some sales on tater tot dressing, which is basic, or not dressing, but sour cream. So it's basically sour cream with onions and chives in it. They have that on sale, 24-ounce containers. I also got a really good price on some cottage cheese. And I like using cottage cheese, particularly for lasagna, but also for some other things. But these are pretty big containers. They're 24 ounces, and usually my husband and I might use 12 ounces at most for something. So anyway, I decided to do, on my 4 trays today, I'm doing dairy. So I'm doing 2 trays of sour cream, of the tater tot sour cream, which I've already loaded. And these are 24-ounce containers. My trays, if I fill them with water right to the brim, will hold 4 cups. But that's right to the brim, and there's not going to be any room for any movement. So 1 container worked out really well in each one of these trays. Now I told you at the beginning that I numbered my trays. Why did I do that? Generally in a freeze dryer, your top tray and your bottom tray are going to be a little bit cooler than the rest of the trays. There's heating pads under those trays that kind of heat the food at the appropriate time. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. And you want your food that might be the most wet, so to speak, or might take the longest time to dry on your middle trays. Given that I only have 4 trays, trays 2 and 3 are critical for me. Also on your freeze dryer, one of your trays is important. It's sort of your sensor. For me, it's tray 2. Now, I debated whether to put the sour cream or the cottage cheese on the middle trays because the sour cream is pretty solid and obviously pretty wet. I ultimately decided to put the cottage cheese on 2 and 3 primarily because you have all of those curds with cottage cheese, and I think those are going to take a little bit longer to dry. So in my trays 1 and 4, I have sour cream, actually it's tater tot dressing, 24 ounces. In tray number 2, I have cottage cheese, and in tray number 3, I'm also going to put cottage cheese. Now, some people will put paper down, and I use paper for some things, but not for this. I'm not going to use it for that because spreading is just going to move the paper around. So basically, I'm taking my 24-ounce container of cottage cheese and basically just dumping it on the tray, cleaning my container out completely. Now, I like reusing these containers. They're really nice for if I make cookies or have leftovers. I just use these trays and I don't have to put the plastic away in the dump, so to speak. So I just take my cottage cheese and I spread this out evenly, as thin as I can. And when I say thin, I really mean more evenly. I want to get it as evenly spread as I can, making sure I get into the corners. If I'm going to have a spot that it's going to be just a little bit thinner, it's going to be in the center of the tray. And the reason for that, of course, is because as it's drying, it's going to dry from the outside in, and the inside is always going to take the longest. So one of the things that I learned about dehydrating food or freeze drying is it's different than dehydrating. Hang on a sec. So when I'm dehydrating food, you want to take it out of your dehydrator, you want it to cool down before you package it, right? What's different about freeze drying is it's just the opposite. You're taking all of your moisture out of the food, and you actually want to remove your food from your freeze dryer when the food is still warm. Because once you take it out, freeze-dried food will in a hurry start absorbing moisture in the air. So my time today, however long this is going to take me, is going to be different if you did yours today in your home, because all of our homes have different amounts of humidity in them. And that makes a difference. If your home is really humid or really warm, it's going to take a little bit longer to dehydrate than not. We have about a 47-degree day today. My freeze dryer is in the basement, and they work best if you can keep the temperatures of the freeze dryer unit between 60 and 75 degrees. We do have a pretty consistent temperature in the basement, so that's good. So I have tray 3 here, and what I did is I just took it out and spread it out. Really easy. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take these trays, I'm going to put them downstairs in the freeze dryer, and I'm going to show you how easy it is to get this going. All right, so my food is in the freeze dryer. Open that back up. And you can see that I have, my trays are numbered. And I have the sour cream up on top. And the cottage cheese are on 2 and 3. I do have some tray dividers in there, just for portion. And sour cream on number 4. Now here's how I get it started. I come over and I push the freeze drying button. I don't have frozen food, so I'm just going to go ahead and press the setting button. And then it's going to ask me about parameters here. So my freeze time exceeds 12 hours. That's okay, it's not going to run longer. My shelf temperature is going to go lower to, my shelf temperature is going to go to a -5. I'm okay with that. My drying pressures, really my shelf temperature is 120. My final dry time, I do want to have that a little bit higher, but I'll be able to set that to 24. And the reason you do that really is, enter that. The reason you do that is because if you're going to be busy when your freeze dryer is done, this just gives you lots of time. So then I go over here and I hit back. And let's see, I'm going to hit start over here. And that's it. So it's going to start freezing and we'll see how it goes. Here are the 2 trays of the tater tot sour cream topping, completely dry. And I'll talk about how I checked them shortly. So I'll now get those bagged, but you can see how the texture is. Not want to blend up the tater tot in a blender. So what I did is I put it all in a Ziploc bag, and then I'm going to use a rolling pin basically to get it into a powder. Here are the 2 cottage cheese trays. They also are dry. And basically, we just have, you can still see the curds in there, but it's just really light and flaky. I'm back and it's the next day, and I have successfully freeze dried, I guess, my cottage cheese and also my tater tot topping, which again is just really sour cream and chives and onions, but we really like it. So yield is interesting. I want to talk about that, and then we're going to talk about rehydrating it. So with the cottage cheese, initially I broke up the pieces and the jar was fairly full, and then I decided to kind of take it down just to kind of see where we're at as far as volume. And I didn't powder this, or I didn't smash it down, because I really want to have the cottage cheese curds when I'm all done. So what I have with that really is, excuse me, this is a half-gallon jar. So I have probably not quite a quart here, and probably a little bit more than a pint here. I also have a pint here, which actually is about 12 ounces, because 12 ounces is about what we use at a time to make, like, for example, lasagna. So these two are actually even. Because I'm going to use this fairly quickly, I decided to store it in a jar, but then I also did some and put it in a bag with some oxygen absorbers. This particular jar, I kept separate for a reason. Part of what you want to do when you're freeze drying is, when you think it's done, you want to weigh your trays. And you want to weigh those in grams. And the reason you do grams instead of ounces is because it's a much finer measurement. There are about 23 grams in 1 ounce. So it would be difficult to tell if I weighed my trays, did I lose more water? If I lost more water, then I know things aren't as dry. For 3 out of the 4 trays, when I took my initial measurement and then I took my second measurement, they were exactly the same, so I knew everything was dry. This one actually had gained 5 grams, and that's not a lot, but it can be when you're talking about freeze-dried food. Freeze-dried food is super, super dry. You've got maybe 97 to 98% of your moisture removed. So when you have your food out and you have moisture in the air, or it's humid, it's going to very quickly want to absorb that water back in. I think this is going to be fine, but I'm going to keep it in a glass jar, and I'm going to use it first just to be sure, simply because I don't want to risk this going bad. But it's really a good way to check your freeze-dried food, is to weigh it in grams, wait an hour and a half, 2 hours, weigh it again, and then make sure that you haven't had a weight change, or that's maybe been no more than 1 gram. Like I said, most of this was just spot on. So with 24 ounces of sour cream or tater tot topping, same thing, I really ended up with just short of 2 quarts. You could see that it's just a little bit less. This one I have a paper towel in it, because when you have something like powdery like this, put a paper towel on your jar and then vacuum seal it, and that's a good way to kind of keep that powder and dust from getting into your vacuum sealer. This one I had kept open because I wanted to rehydrate. So good volume with that. And what I did is I took the pieces of this, I put it in a plastic bag, and then I used a rolling pin to kind of powder it. I didn't want to put it in a blender simply because that produces heat and friction with the friction, and that introduces moisture. So that's what I did. This worked really well. I'm really happy with it. With the cottage cheese, again, I just put it in jars and shake it. I think you could break it up with your hands too. This worked really well. I could do that like so. I'm actually going to take this and put this in a smaller jar, because you really don't want to store something long term where you have the jar half empty with half oxygen. And the same thing with this. Now, let's talk about rehydrating these. So what I have is I have my powdered sour cream, or my tater tot topping here, and I have my cottage cheese here. The cottage cheese was a little bit harder to measure how much I put in, because, you know, I have clumps here. It's not powder. So the general rule of thumb is to start with a little bit of water and then see what happens. Sometimes you're going to rehydrate, and sometimes you're going to just plain soak something. So think about whether or not something is going to dissolve or not. If I put a lot of water in this and it gets real watery, I'm not really going to have sour cream. If I take some green beans and throw them in water to rehydrate those, the green beans aren't going to dissolve, so the amount of water that I put in there is not as critical. The other thing you want to think about is how you're going to eat your food is going to some degree, determine if you're going to use hot water or cold water. Obviously with cottage cheese, that's something that's normally refrigerated. It's cold, so I'm using cold water. So in here I have 2 tablespoons of the tater tot topping or the sour cream. And to that, I'm going to add half of that. I'm going to add 1 tablespoon of water. And I'm going to give that a stir and then let that absorb and see what happens. It's not going to be instant in most cases. It's going to be something that the food is going to take up what it needs, and you have to give it a little bit of time. Now, with the cottage cheese, I'm going to do the same thing. I don't know for sure how much I have in here, so I'm going to add a little bit less than a tablespoon on this because I had to eyeball that, and I'm going to give that a stir. With the cottage cheese, I have the curds, and so that's going to take a little bit more time to absorb than powder. So I have to play with this a little bit and see what I'm going to get. Now, with the sour cream, it's coming along actually pretty well. And I don't know if I'm going to add any more powder to this. I'm just going to go, right now it's looking just a little bit grainy. So I'm just going to let that absorb a little bit. Now obviously if I got too much water in here, I could add a little bit more of the powder and then you know, bring that to the consistency that I want. So I'm going to let both of these just sit for a minute. This cottage cheese, it's absorbing, but I think I need just a little bit more water, so I'm going to add a little bit more water. And I'm going to stir that. And I'm going to let both of these sit for a minute or two, and then I'm going to come back and show you what the results are. So stay tuned. I have successfully rehydrated both of these, and I'm really pleased with it. So first, the sour cream. I did add more water because initially it was kind of grainy, and in about 10 minutes it was fully hydrated. You can see the sour cream. It's nice and it's smooth. And it tastes exactly like it did yesterday when I put it into the freeze dryer. So this is going to be really, really nice to use to put on baked potatoes or to make dip or to season other things. The powder is such that if I was going to mix it with milk, for example, or you know, put it in soup or something with a lot of liquid, then I wouldn't have to really worry about rehydrating it. But this is really, really good, and this is a win, and I'm really happy with this. My husband would love this, for example, on chips. The cottage cheese also went really well. I did add quite a bit more water to this, and it took about 20 minutes for it to rehydrate. I would say that it took maybe about twice to 2 1/4 times the amount of powder or ingredient that I had in there, the freeze-dried part. It was difficult to measure that because remember I had the chunks and the pieces, but look at what I have. I totally have cottage cheese now. And it tastes like cottage cheese. I still have the curds. It's really, really good. To wrap up, what have I learned today? I've learned that dairy product freeze dries really, really well. And again, when I put the sour cream and the cottage cheese into the freeze dryer, I did not pre-freeze it. I figured this was wet. It's kind of a worst case scenario for how long it's going to take. I did reset the freeze time to 12 hours yesterday because I thought 5 hours probably wasn't enough given that I wasn't starting with a frozen product. And when you're freeze drying, you need to make sure your food is absolutely frozen solid so that the process of freeze drying allows basically that frozen food to pull out the moisture and turn it into a gas. And if your food is not frozen solid, you're not going to have that happen. So I did reset that for 12 hours. Did it take 12 hours? I don't know. It might have taken 7 or 8 hours. It might have taken 10 hours. It might have taken 6 hours. But I used 12 just to be really safe. And then I went ahead, or the machine I should say, went ahead and froze the rest of it. Total time, including the freeze time in the freeze dryer, was 21.5 hours, which seems like a lot, but I really didn't have to do anything. Now, a lot of people ask, what about the cost? How expensive is it? Yes, the freeze dryer is expensive. And this is a worst case scenario because I actually use the freeze dryer to freeze the food. That said, I have a meter on my unit because I also wanted to know what it was costing me for electricity. I set my electrical rate at 19 cents per kilowatt hour. At this time of year, I'm actually paying just under 14 cents. and I expect it's going to be about 18 something during the summer months. But I set it at 19 cents, and it cost me $2.88 in electricity. That was for the total of the 21 and a half hours. So freeze drying is a great option for me. It's going to be something that I'm definitely going to do to be able to not only build my pantry, but to avoid waste in the future. And as far as dairy goes, for at least the sour cream and the cottage cheese, it's a thumbs up. So if you're interested, be sure to put a thumbs up on this video. I really appreciate that. Be sure to subscribe in your bottom right corner to get updated, because I'll be doing lots more freeze dryer notices. If you want more information on my freeze dryer, I have an affiliate link below. And if you decide to buy one down the road, use my discount code DRYCAN and you'll get $50 off your freeze dryer. So I thank you for watching. I hope you liked the video. If you have questions, let me know, and we'll see you next time.